This is a warning of all spoilers.
Hello everyone, Alex here. Today I'm going to bring you my first Song of Ice and Fire / Game of Thrones series theories. Now I'm going to be discussing a widely discussed topic and one that many people have different theories about. Obviously there's one primary theory, but I'm going to discuss the Jon Snow parentage today. Now, I'm not going to be discussing the widely believed theory R plus L equals J, but instead a theory that's out there but not quite as common. That's that Ned Stark and Ashara Dayne are the parents of Jon Snow. Now, this is not a new theory. If you read the forums, if you watch other theories videos, I believe Charlie in Westeros did a similar video about Ned and Ashara being his parents. We disagree on some things, especially the implications it has down the line, but this theory is out there. And so I think that it's very plausible, and I want to get out some information that I think is important that everyone hears about this idea. So, first to start, I don't want to talk about Ashara Dayne. I want to talk about another woman. It's a woman that we all heard from the first book, and that's the name Wylla. When Ned and Robert Baratheon are traveling down the King's Road, Ned's just been named Han, and Robert and company are going to King's Landing. Excuse me. Ned and Robert start discussing Jon Snow. And Robert goes, what's that woman's name? Your bastard's mother. What's her name again? So he's heard the name before. And Ned gives the name Wylla. And then ends it there. Later, in Storm of Swords, when Arya is with the Brotherhood Without Banners, we see Edric Dayne, Ned Dayne, as some call him, the Lord of Starfell, 12-year-old Edric Dayne. And he tells Arya that he and Jon Snow are milk brothers, that they share the same wet nurse. Edric talks about his wet nurse Wylla, and says that she is Jon Snow's mother, and that's what they're told in Starfall. That's what he's been told his whole life, essentially. And he also talks about how Wylla's been in service to House Dayne for many years, even before he was born. So one can reason to say that Wylla was in service to House Dayne when Ashara was alive, and around the time Jon Snow might have been born. Now, to me, these things don't point to the fact that Wylla is Jon's mother, but that Wylla could be used as a cover-up for something else. Now, obviously Wylla is giving this information herself, and Ned is saying her name to Robert, and has been saying the name to Robert, possibly for some time. Now, to me it's strange. Why would Wylla, someone in service of House Dayne, randomly want to cover for Lyanna Stark? Just because Lyanna's baby's father would have been Rhaegar? To me, this doesn't fit in. But to me, what makes more sense is that she is covering for her lady that she serves, and that would have been Ashara Dayne, and House Dayne that she serves. Now, we know from a number of stories in the book, or a number of things the characters tell us in the books, that Ned had a romantic interest in Ashara Dayne. She was a very beautiful woman. We know she had long dark hair, violet eyes, Targaryen-like eyes, although we've heard from George R. R. Martin that she's not Valyrian in any way. But she was very beautiful. Barristan Selmy says that he would have named her Queen of Love and Beauty of House Wentz, Tormund, and Harrenhal if he had won. Of course, Rhaegar won, and Lyanna was named to that title, and we know what happened from there. But Harrison tells us about her beauty. Mira Reed tells Bran, when she's discussing the story about the Night of the Laughing Tree, that Howland remarked that both the Stark boys, Brandon and Ned, danced with Ashara at the tournament. Of course, Ned couldn't do it without sort of the help of his brother, but that just shows, the shyness of Ned. But still, he danced with Ashara Dane, and they could have very easily connected this time. We'll actually first hear the name Ashara Dane in Game of Thrones, when Catelyn first talks about rumors that circulated around Winterfell when Jon was brought back, and even then the name Ashara came up. Additionally, again in Dance with Dragons, Barristan talks about how one of the Starks dishonored her at the tournament. He believes leaving her with the child that would eventually be stillborn by his knowledge. However, others believe that Ashara's the mother. Cersei brings this up at one point. It's believed by some people that Ashara is the mother. Now, a lot of people point to the timeline as a major issue, because if Barristan's correct with his timeline, Ashara was left with child around 281. Now, Jon wouldn't have been born till around 283. About a few months after the sacking of King's Landing. It's believed he was conceived around the time Robb Stark was, so that's when Ned Stark had married Catelyn. He was a river run for a fortnight. Now, I don't think this is necessarily true. And I also don't think that Jon's born when we think he was born. I don't think he's younger than Robb, even if it's a few months. I think he could be a few months older than Robb. Now, at that age, it's very difficult to tell which baby would be younger or older. I think that Jon was conceived sometime between the tournament and Ned's marriage to Catelyn Stark. We know that after the tournament, Ned went back to the Vale, where, of course, he was a ward of Jon Arryn, along with Robert Baratheon. And this could perhaps be times where Ned, despite his great honor, if he was truly in love, which is what Mira Reed believes Howland has told her, and other people, have heard this rumor, that if Ned was truly in love, his honor, he was mistaken. Now, he wasn't married to Catelyn at the time, because I believe that Jon was conceived during this period in between, these few months in between, so that Jon would be a few months older than Robb Stark. Now, the fact that Robert had heard the name Wylla before could very easily mean that Robert thought Ned was going to rendezvous with this woman Wylla from time to time, when it was really Ashara Dane, and the name Wylla would be covering for her, as she has for a few years. Additionally, we hear this very strange story of the fisherman's daughter, that when Ned was trying to be brought back into the north, he was brought in by a fisherman who was caught in a storm, whose ship was damaged, and during this time Ned impregnated his daughter, and they had a bastard child who she named after her lord Jon Arryn, and named him Jon Snow, because he was conceived in the north, and he was born Jon Snow. Now, to me, this story is fishy, no pun intended, because it doesn't seem very much like Ned. Some could say neither does Ned having a child with Ashara Dane, but there's more backing to the fact that Ned might have been in love with Ashara Dane than there would be for the fisherman's daughter. And to me, the story is strange because again, this doesn't seem like Ned. And, could this boat actually have been carrying Ashara Dane? Could the boat have never shipwrecked? Because the fisherman's daughter did give birth in the story. And, I believe that since Jon Snow, although he could have been born in Dorne, he was conceived in the north. Because he's snow and not sand, which I think he could have been if he was Lyanna's, because he was born in Dorne. Now, other people might see holes in the story as, the promise me Ned situation. Because Ned always thinks back to promise me Ned. In his fever dream, he remembers the Kingsguard, including Arthur Dayne, guarding the Tower of Joy. And he remembers Lyanna calling out, Eddard. And, of course, he doesn't remember how it happened, but he remembers it being he and Helen Reed left. He brought 7 men there, including himself, and the other 5 were killed, and 2 other members, including Gerald Hightower, were killed at the Kingsguard, but Arthur Dayne was left. And he and Helen Reed were there, and he doesn't remember anything between that moment and when he was in the Tower of Joy. And he remembers Lyanna and the smell of roses and blood, and her being in a bath or a bed of blood. And many people believe that she gave birth to a child. In addition, the Kingsguard would have been there to guard the heir to Rhaegar. His other son had been killed, and so he would have been the heir. But I don't think this necessarily points to Lyanna giving birth to Jon Snow. And because she died in childbirth, it's very possible that with no one there to tend to her, that her child died as well in childbirth. And so Ned has these horrible flashbacks to her because it was a horrible experience. He lost his only sister. She lost a child that day. He couldn't fulfill the promise to take care of the child because the child died. And the other promises he could fulfill. Don't tell Robert. Don't tell anyone. I loved Rhaegar. I started this war. I got my brother and my father killed. Promise me you'll bury me in Winterfell. And Ned buried her in Winterfell, I believe, along with her child, or the bones of her child. There are other reasons besides, the stories of Ned loving Ashara Dayne, that I think I think Ned, specifically, is Jon's father. Now, Tyrion describes Jon as more Stark-like, more North-like than any of his siblings. Of course, one could argue that just because Rhaegar would have been his father doesn't mean he looks Targaryen. We know that Rhaegar's daughter looked Dornish, even though his son Aegon did look, as a babe, Targaryen. But Ashara Dayne has dark hair as well, even driving home the point that he would have dark hair, more black hair than any of his siblings, and be more North-like than any of his siblings. Additionally, I think that the symbolism of the direwolf cannot be overlooked. A lot of people see the fact that there are 6 direwolves, representing that they're all descendants of a Stark. But to me, I feel that it really points to the fact that they're all from the same wolf, in this case, Ned. Now, of course, the 5 normal direwolves, let's say, were perfectly matched up to the Stark children. And then there's Ghost. Ghost is the albino wolf, sticks out different from the rest of them. Of course, he's white as snow, which points to me that Jon is not legitimate. Unfortunately for many, he's not legitimate. He's a snow. White as snow. Additionally, it points to me that he's older, and Maester Payne, a fellow YouTuber, made this point, and I think it's extremely important when looking at this topic, that Ghost had its eyes opened while the others were blind. They hadn't opened their eyes yet. And to me, this represents that Ghost is older than the others. And since I feel that the wolves represent their owners, and the owners represent their wolves, it's sort of, they're one and the same, that Ghost being as the oldest, and Jon is the oldest, and so he's actually a few months older than Robb, and the timeline works a little bit better. Now, what does all this mean for Jon in the series? Now, first, let me start off with saying that Jon not being Targaryen, I don't think will impact anything. First off, he will not be dead, in my opinion. We may get a ghost chapter because one of his last thoughts after he's attacked by his brothers, and that Caesar-esque moment, is that he thinks of Ghost, and so I think we could get a ghost chapter. He's in Ghost's body, and we get a point of view of Ghost because we know he has the wolf dreams, and we know that all Starks can warg as per George R. R. Martin. But I think he'll be revived by Melisandre, revived by fire, thus reborn of smoke, and fulfilling the prophecy of Azor Ahai reborn. He'll be born of smoke. Now, if he's Azor Ahai reborn, and of course he'll lead the fight against the others, he has to wield Lightbringer. Now, we all know, or we all really assume, that Stannis is not using Lightbringer. Sure, it's red, but it doesn't have any heat. Is Stannis really going to lead the fight against the others? Is he really Azor Ahai reborn? Remember, Melisandre's visions have all been snow, 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 and it's not lowercase snow, it's capital S, snow. So, to me, this points to Azor Ahai reborn. Now, Lightbringer. If he was part Dane, he'd be able to wield Dawn. He could be named Sword of the Morning if he's deemed most worthy. Which I think he would be considered most worthy, since he'd be leading a valiant fight against the greatest threat Westeros has ever faced. And thus he would wield Dawn, which I think is the real Lightbringer. Maybe it is not made of Valyrian steel, but it has a strange origin. It was crafted from a fallen star, a red comet, which we know has some magical ties to it. And the red comet representing heat, representing fire. I think Dawn, and we know it lights. We know it shines like milky white, like the moon, and like the sun. It's beautiful. It brings light almost quite literally. We've never heard of its heat, but we never have heard anything contrary to it. And so Dawn will be Lightbringer, and Jon will wield it. Thus, truly fulfilling the prophecy of Azor Ahai reborn. Now, his lack of Targaryen blood doesn't stop him from riding a dragon, in my opinion, because his half-brother, Bran, is an extremely powerful warg. Many people expect Bran to warg a dragon, and I do the same. And he wargs the dragon, in my opinion, so Jon can ride the dragon. Which dragon? I see it being Viserion, I believe, is the white dragon, because he's snow. His direwolf is white, his sword brings light, and he's snow, and he will ride the white dragon into combat against the others. Now, a number of things, of course, are fuzzy. How does he get the sword? How does he find out who his parents are? And I think both actually come back to Howland Reed. Now, last we heard, Dawn was with the Danes. Ned brought her back to Ashara Dane. Of course, Ashara Dane killed herself, I believe, because of the grief that her lover killed her brother. They had a child together, but he still killed her brother. She killed herself. That's why Ned took Jon back. But of course, Howland Reed would know this, and I think Howland Reed will emerge at some point to reveal the facts. But I also think Howland Reed could have Dawn, and with him he would bring Dawn and present it to Jon when he reveals that Jon is a Dane, is half Dane, is half Stark. Again, this theory has many holes. I'm sure a lot of you probably think this is just some crackpot theory. But, please leave a comment below to express your opinions, to tell me what you think about Jon Snow's parentage. Rhaegar and Lyanna, as his parents, have many good points to it. Tell me if you subscribe to that, if you have a different theory altogether. And thank you for watching.